everyone. My name is Tyler Pate, and I'm back for another Adobe Pro Tips, streaming live from Los Angeles, California. Let's see, how is everyone doing today? Let's check out the chat here. Let's let it fill up a little bit. But I'm very excited to be back here. Again, Pro Tips is a really great feature where we get to really dive into the nitty-gritty of some of my favorite tools and hopefully some of yours, or maybe just explore something that maybe you haven't really fully understood or wanted to understand a little bit better. And today's going to be a real special one because we're not only going to be doing one of my favorite type of features, but we're going to be illustrating a perspective, not just any perspective, but isometric perspective. So it's a really fun one. I get asked a lot for different tips and tricks on how to set up your grid, how to illustrate, how to replicate different shapes and dimensions within this perspective. So it's really fun to be able to share some of my tips along the way. So let's let the chat here fill in a little bit before we get started. Let's see. Got a couple high fives. How's everyone doing? Ooh, Voodoo Val, how you doing? It's been a while. Okay. So I think we can go ahead and dive in since we are gonna definitely use up all of our time while we're demonstrating how to set up this file. So if you're not familiar with isometric perspective or illustrating in isometric, I've got a couple examples here. I think this is really the best use case that I've had. Just illustrating buildings is always fun, illustrating some set pieces. And honestly, there's a lot of ways you can illustrate your own icons in this isometric perspective, which is really fun. Just to give it some unique top-down view. I think one thing that I get really nostalgic about is it just feels like the old school video games, and that's just in my DNA. I just love that aesthetic so much. Kind of like the Sim City or Roller Coaster Tycoon, if you're a fan of those. I'm a huge fan. So kind of understanding what we're going to do today is you see this pink line here in the background. That is our grid, and that is going to be the foundation for everything that we're creating and illustrating throughout this process. So it's a real like key point to make sure we get correct, because if that grid's correct, all of our perspectives should be a-okay. Just to do a little outline mode to see exactly what we're dealing with. This is a lot. All right. These are all the lines it's taking to create this building, but you'll see that everything is following that grid. I'm just going to back and forth this a little bit just so that you see all the angles on the right side of the building are the same all the way through, and everything on the left side of the building, all the angles are the same. So it's getting that kind of, again, top down, that angular approach throughout all of these individual components of this building. So that's one case. Last night, I actually built this little, inspired off the Macintosh, the classic computer here. I kind of challenged myself. I was like, how quick can we illustrate in this perspective? And I was able to do this in about 20 minutes. So again, we're not going to try to rush it. We're going to try to learn it and really consume just those core principles on how to get there. So let's go ahead and start with, again, that grid. So I'm going to go ahead and jump down to a new artboard. First, we're going to hop on over to our toolbar here, and we're going to look for what we're going to use, which is the rectangular grid tool. So sometimes that's hidden up under your line tool or your line segment tool. So go ahead and click on your rectangle grid tool, and we're going to go ahead and just click. I'm using a stylus here, so I'm going to actually click with my mouse, and then you should see this little dialog box here. Whole bunch of settings in here, but don't worry, you can copy exactly my settings that I'm going to use, or you could experiment and kind of see what this is actually doing, which I always like to take and choose that path. But what we're going to do is set that grid dimension. So I'm going to set this to a large 1000 pixel by 1000 pixel. And that's essentially just showing how many squares are we going to see within that grid. That's all that is. After we get to that, we're going to then Go down to our dividers. We're going to make sure that this is always set the same, just so that our dividing lines are nice and square. And that should be it there. And we're just going to click OK. Very quickly, you'll see that now we have this grid. So this is our lines. Everything checks out. We don't have a fill on this, so I'm going to go ahead and change a stroke fill to, again, it could be any color that you want. I like to pick a color that isn't in my color palette, so it kind of sticks out. Let's just go with some sort of magenta color like this. Okay, perfect. And to really help your future self, let's go ahead and center this to our artboard. And also, you'll notice over here in my layers panel that I've already kind of set up a couple things. Rule of thumb, experiment, find what best practice that you have to get where you want to go. But I like to always separate my layers into my grid layer, my art file layer, and then sometimes there's a background involved. I like to keep that from my artwork, so I like to put that on its own layer too. So let's go ahead and select our grid, and I'm just going to put it on that ISO grid layer, just so that we can separate everything for the future. And again, it's really cool because this grid tool here kind of does all the work for you. And then if you keep it selected, make sure you can hover around that corner area. And I'm going to click down and I'm going to hold shift while I'm doing this, so that I get a nice 40 degrees right here. And you'll see that once we got it kind of turned at this angle, we're now going to kind of skew it a little bit, and that's going to give us our nice proportion that we need for this isometric grid. So with that selected, I'm going to now go up to Object, Transform, Transform Each, and then we're going to see another box here. So is this making sense so far? It's very straightforward. Again, let's check out the chat again, see how everyone's doing. Everyone slowly trickling in. But the main point with this this quick tip is just to really set that grid up, because again, the grid is going to give you so much success down the road. Everything is going to be created on this grid, so everything's consistent. Once you start, it's kind of hard to go back if you've already finished. So if you can get this first part down, everything else should be pretty straightforward. And really, I'm going to show you a little bit later. It's just time. It just takes a little bit time to add that detail. If you want to add more dimension on top of this, you can do that. It just takes a little time and understanding of how this grid works. Okay, so back here, we're going to look at this transform each box. And there's a couple different settings here. We don't have to worry about many of these settings. We're just going to worry about one or two things here. So we're going to keep our scale for the horizontal 100%, and then we're going to skew. I keep saying skew. We're just going to scale it. So what it's going to do is just squish it down for the vertical lines, and we're going to change this to 57.74%. That percent number I found just a little bit of research, since everything has to happen on a percentage, and I think isometric in general is based on a perfect perspective that is a result of this percentage. Okay, so that's good, and then we're just going to click OK, and then immediately you see what happened is everything just got squished down just a little bit. And this is our perfect isometric grid, just like what we had up top. I'll jump back up at our previous illustrations. You could see our faint lines here around our piece. And if I did outline mode, you see the grid. We're seeing some overlap because I had the same grid on this side. But again, same consistency grid. That's all we need. All right, with that, we're going to scale this up because I want this grid to be larger than my artboard. Again, it depends on what you want to really illustrate, because if our illustration is just going to be a single building, well, then we could probably increase this quite a bit. and not have to use any of these surrounding outside the artboard areas of the grid. And we could just keep it down to here. And this also defines really the size of that object that you're going to create. So I like to just scale it just a little bit past our artboard. We'll go a little bit more. And when I'm also, here's a real good indicator of making sure things are consistent. I'm always going to hold shift. See what happens when you hold shift? Everything's going to increase in size proportionally, and we don't want to mess up our proportions. If I don't hold shift, this is what happens. So if you hold shift, everything's going to be nice and consistent. And if you hold shift and option, it'll skew, or it'll increase the size of everything from the center of that object. So that's what I'm doing here. Just increasing it from the center. I got it past my artboard. And to make things a little cleaner, I like to sometimes contain my actual grid within a clipping mask. So I'm just going to create a box. I'm going to select both of these. And I just made a clipping mask. Very simple thing here. Just so that I don't see any of that unnecessary portion of the grid. Just out of sight, out of mind. And again, we do have this hopefully on our ISO grid layer so that I can quickly turn that on and off just like this. That just helps in the future when we're illustrating. You just sometimes want to turn that grid off, take a look at your illustration for what it is, and then make some minor detail movements if you need to. Okay, now that we did that, I also want to do one more thing, which I found this helpful. And sometimes whenever we use a stroke on these lines, maybe a 1-point stroke is too thick for what we're trying to do, because I want it to be as thin as possible. We could turn this into a guide itself, but that feels too permanent for me. So I'm just going to reduce the line weight of this to the bare minimum. Let's do 0.25. Okay. Just so it's nice and clean like that. And now I'm going to go back to my ISO grid layer, and I'm going to lock that. Again, we don't want to ever move that grid once we start illustrating, because it's going to be really hard and tricky to ever find those exact points again. So just keep that in mind. Okay, before we start illustrating, I'm going to click on a new layer, which is going to be my artwork layer. I like to keep those separate. Just helps us separate everything and make sure we're working on the right layer. Couple things to note. And just before we dive in further, let's see, how's everyone doing? We're looking good. And if you have any questions about this, please jump in the chat. Happy to help. Also, some quick tips for illustrating. So when we're illustrating, I'm typically using just the pen tool. And you'll notice what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to draw based on each of these point segments of the grid. And here's something that we can work through together. So it's like, well, how do I actually know I'm on the grid? So what if I think I'm on the grid, but actually this is the mess I'm dealing with? That's not good enough. We need to keep it consistent. So a couple things to do. We can go up to view. We can also make sure snap to point, make sure that's selected. And then I love to keep our smart guides. So that's Command U for any Mac users. I like to keep that selected because this is where it comes in. When I'm illustrating with my pen tool, you'll see the cursor kind of snaps in to the intersections of our grid. So that makes illustrating this so much easier. And I'm just going to constantly go to each point intersecting and then place a piece there. So these little points here, and let's go ahead and change our shape color so we can see what we're doing. Something like this. So this is following our grid. Do you see this shape? Still there. And that's essentially one wall. If we were creating a building here, that's the front or the back, whichever way you're facing it. And then we're going to just plot our points, following our grid. And it is also very helpful when you start making these dimensions. Let's go ahead and start defining our color palette, because we want to have some sort of light source that's different on our left, our right, our top side, so that at the end, nothing's just blending in together. We want to show that there's some sort of light being casted. So I like to define one side as being darker, one side being lighter. And then for the top, we'll make our third color. Again, you see my smart guides helping me line things up nice and easily. And then look, this is a great point of the grid. You see that I didn't place that point exactly where I needed. That's okay, because we can direct select, drag that point down, and see how it snaps into place? Snaps right into place where we need it to be. And I'm going to change the color of this to a lighter color. So look at this. Here's our cube. I'm going to turn my grid off. That's working in isometric. That is all it is. Seriously, we're going to repeat this process all the way through. So even looking back at some of our earlier illustrations that I showed you, I was doing this over and over and over. And it becomes really fast once you understand those different points and then understand where I want that angle and dimension to really come out. So if I was to take this a step further, so let's say our example of earlier, I'll jump right back to that. That's this little computer here. So what about these angles? How do we handle these angles that are going in these kind of a unique shape and these cutoff areas here to the right? There's just a lot going on. Even the type. What about the type? That's not as easy as just plotting points with the pen tool. It's okay. We can quickly show you how to do that, because I'm going to turn my grid back on, get back to my artwork. So if I was going to, let's say, mimic what I did in the computer option, I'm going to select one side of this shape. I'm going to copy, Command C, and then Command F, which copied and pasted that same line from the back end of that shape. You see it right here? So that is still in our perspective that we need. I'm going to keep that selected. I'm moving it up a little bit on the top side square, and select that. And I'm going to go to my Pathfinder, and I'm going to cut that just like there. I'm going to select these pieces, and I'm just going to move this down a little bit. This will make sense here in a little bit, so bear with me. Everything is still in isometric view. As long as we don't change our left and right angles, we should be good. So now we have like this little slope like you see here. I'm going to actually drop this down a little further. Like this. I don't actually need that shape anymore. And then what's next? We could actually make the keyboard pretty easily. I'm going to go with outline mode, and I'm constantly doing Command Y for that. That key command is just legendary for illustrating in this perspective. I'm just going to create what will be the base of our keyboard, like so. I need to reduce the depth of it, so I'm going to jump in. I'm going to cut this piece with the Pathfinder tool, and now we're left with what I'm going to use as the keyboard. I'm going to drag it back up, keep it on my grid so that we can all have the same perspective. And I'm going to click on it, hold, and I'm going to hold Option and Shift at the same time, so we don't change that angle on the side here. I'm going to change the color of my base so we can see the difference. And then we're just going to connect our side piece here. At this point, I'm just connecting each point to each corner, creating the walls of our keyboard here. And I'm going to select that corner and the left corner, and I'm going to move this up just so that we get that angle that some of these old school keyboards have, which is nice. And we're going to jump real quick to our screen. Again, here's another quick tip. I'm going to create an inside shape to this, which will be the screen. If we're going to reference this little computer I made earlier, option, path, offset path, and we're going to make this inside, something like that, and click OK. Whenever you do the inside path within this perspective, you're still in that isometric perspective, which is, it's so simple once you see it, because it's not changing the top, the bottom, or the right or left side of any of the angles. It's just reducing it inward. So those angles should be the same. Now we have like our screen here, and we can even move this up because again, we're not changing any angle. We're just reducing the height. As long as you hold shift and drag up, those two lines on the left and right should be straight, up and down, always. So what about type? How do we add some type to here? So with my type tool, let's just go ahead and say hello. I'll get real particular because let's face it, we got to have a good font. I like this. Let's see, a nice up and down font should be good. It's too heavy. Scale it down a little bit. So something to notice with this, we're going to build it on the screen. That's where we want this type on the screen. So let's go ahead and do outline mode. And you see the beginning type line here. That baseline needs to be in one of these little intersecting corners. And please, you got to zoom in. If you can't see it, got to make sure it's there. So with that snugged in the corner, I'm going to now go to my transformation tool, which if you don't know where that's at, that is very fun. Oop, where'd it go? There we go. It looks like this in the toolbox, or you could just mash E on the keyboard. And I'm going to drag this piece down, but I'm going to hold shift while I'm dragging down, and I'm going to try to line up the base of all my letters. And the O, you got to realize the O is going to always drop down a little bit past that line, but our L, E, and H should be right on that line. And please zoom in. Always, zoom is your friend. Never forget it. I'm just going to drop it down until I could see it's intersected on my line. So check that out. And the best part about this, it's still live text. So I always like to keep that off to the side, duplicate your text because you might have to go back to it later. But check it out. Now we have this on the screen. And we have this little computer shaping up pretty nicely. And again, we could just go in even further. Just gotta, it's about a next layer of that dimension. So if we wanted to now start adding some of those little depth lines on the computer, I'm just gonna duplicate these lines, join them, and let's add another color. Let's add like a darker tone so that we can start seeing kind of the grooves of a computer, like the inner workings of that case, right? So now it's just about fixing these different details and making sure they really see some dimension to them. And we're just going to repeat that over and over and over. And you'll realize it just takes a little bit of time using that perspective grid. Again, it's on a different layer so we can turn it on and off. And before you know it, we got something in isometric. It's that easy as long as you have that grid and you follow the rules of perspective in ISO. So just to jump back to where we started, these are the possibilities, and it's just that easy. I hope this was able to help you, and I'd love to see what you have. So please share your work, tag me in it. Love to check it out. And if you have any other questions or any other concerns, just drop a comment down below, and I'll get to them. So thanks again. My name's Tyler Pate, and I'll see you next time.